Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are once again looking at the updated BR changes. Last video we had a look at the aviation and naval stuff, and now we're going to get into some very radical changes in the form of ground realistic. The amount of changes that they're pushing through is quite extensive. Some of them I agree with, some of them I disagree with, but overall the reasoning at least they've given, at least it's nice that they've given some reasoning on some of them. The general thing that Gaijin has been lampooned for many times is making decisions without proper explanation, and now proper explanation is given for different reasons and different reactions. So that to me is positive and should be lauded. So let's go through some of the stuff that they say before we have a look at the BR changes themselves, because it is very important. The first part is a few days ago we posted the planned changes to the battle ratings. We have received a number of comments from you, and as always are grateful for your constructive feedback. After processing this information and further study of the statistics and possible options for changing battle ratings, as well as other possible balance parameters, we've decided to put a few changes to the planned BR changes. Since some of the solutions may not seem obvious, we would like to clarify them, and also say a few words about the balancing of War Thunder vehicles. The efficiency of a vehicle in game modes with multiple respawns may depend not only on its combat characteristics, but also on the surrounding conditions. Other vehicles from the player's setup at the given BR and opposing nations most often met, true for joint RB, and some other factors. So you can see already, they're explaining that it isn't just about the power level of the individual vehicle. What matters as well is the fact of what it faces, because obviously we have what we would class as meta BRs in the game. Therefore, if you have like a really strong 7-3, it doesn't really matter if it's a really strong 7-3, because it'll go up against normally 8-0s because of where the meta sits when it comes to what the majority are playing. Then also, it matters what lineups that it has around it. The individual vehicle does matter, but not as much as the greater picture, which is its opponents and also what you can run it with. An example of this would be the M48. The M48 for the Germans at 7.0, you either had to up-tier it with the BMP-1 and some other vehicles, or what you had to do is bring along a bunch of 6.7s with it. Therefore, relying on the M48, let's say if you get into a 7.7 game, which, was pretty popular at the time because of stuff like Britain 7.7 and America 7.7, it means that you have to somehow, with this vehicle plus a bunch of 6.7s, fight a fully stacked 7.7 lineup, which ain't going to be easy to do. So because of that, they've said, in the view of the above, the following changes will be made to the game. So the German M48A2C and the Soviet T44-100, the BR remains as current, so they're actually going to keep them the same. The BR of other tanks is decreasing in order to form a more effective set in RB, so once again a lineup. The effectiveness of these vehicles is currently at the lower limit of efficiency, and their BR was also considered to be reduced. So now, as we talked about, they're forming lineups around these vehicles to try and give them a little bit of help to see if that will help their statistics. And I think overall this is a positive change. Instead of bringing them down, bringing stuff to their level so then they can fight effectively. So they also see the comparison table of the top 5 most frequent encountered opponents for the M48A2C and M48A1. So obviously the M48A1 is the American M48A1 that they're talking about here. So for the M48A2C, the German M48, the top 5 vehicles that it fights are the Vickers MBT, the FV4202, Centurion Mark III, Carnarvon, and also T34. So what do you see here? Well, you see a 7.7, 3 7.0s, and a 6.7, showing that there is at least, in the BR range, a bunch of vehicles that it does fight, which are different BRs, but at the same same time, they all have very common stats to them, or at least four of them do. They have stabilizers, and they have very powerful APDS, which was buffed last year in the form of the Carnarvon, the Cent, the FE4202, and the Vickers. Just shows how powerful Britain has been at that BR for an incredibly long time. The same reason why the repair costs went through the roof, and the same reason why these vehicles went up in BR as well. Then, on top of this, the T-34. The T-34 has been an incredibly strong vehicle for a long time for the Americans and a staple of the 6-7 lineup, so it isn't a surprise that stuff like the M48 from the Germans see this. This also shows that the Germans face a lot of America and Britain, not a surprise how the matchmaker is set up. Now let's have a look at the American side. So it faces the Leopard 1, the BMP-1, the Tiger 2H, the SPZ BMP-1, and the T-44-100. So do you see the difference here, where none of them have a stabilizer, none of them have cracker APDS? Instead, what they're mostly using are either missiles or they're using a Heat FS, apart from the Tiger 2H, which is mainly using AP, and as I said, lack of stabilizers, therefore lack of being able to hit straight while moving around the place. And you can also see once again BRs from 7.7 to 6.7, no BRs of 8.3 or 8.0 that these things are fighting. So once again, you can see here that they're going into what normal vehicles or the meta vehicles that people play at these BRs. They're all either mediums or heavies or lights, you know, no TDs here and no AAs. What a surprise. So this is what they're comparing it to, which is what they should compare it to, which is why statistics are important in this regard. Not just for the statistics of the vehicle themselves, but what it actually faces. You can see that these two vehicles here face completely different enemies because of the matchmaker. Therefore, they have to be balanced around that set instead of being balanced around the actual effectiveness of the vehicle solely, which it seems like a lot of people want to do. So therefore, they can say, as you can see, the difference is significant. So for example, the presence of a stabilizer on opponents to the M48A2C affects the final statistical efficiency compared to the M48A1 and its opponents. I wouldn't just say that, I would also say heat and APDS differences, and also reload differences between the vehicles, and also mobility, and also the fact that you can run them all in a lineup together. So yeah, you can see the fact that they're giving reasons why the German M48 was doing much worse than the American M48, and I hope people understand this. You know, it's why before I brought up the point of lineups, it's why before, you know, we talked about the vehicle, even though I overall disagree with the vehicle going down to 6.7, you can understand why they made the decision, and now they've reverted the decision, but now they have to do a bunch of different decisions to be able to try and actually fix this BR range for these vehicles. The presence of the powerful APDS and also stabilizer is a big headache for a lot of vehicles around this BR. The next point as well is they're actually doing a bunch of top rank changes as well, 10.7 changes, and these are predicated on what happened last update and also the update before, where the 2A6 got added along with a bunch of new shells for the M1A2, the T90, and also the Challenger. So the first part is all Soviet rank 7 MBTs are currently performing significantly worse in overall combat efficiency to MBTs from other nations. So a decision was made to reduce their BR to 10.3. The same decision, according to our estimates, will also increase the effectiveness of the T80B, since this tank spends a significant part of battles on a higher BR as a tank of the second or third tier. So the tank remains at its current BR. We're also working on introducing the more effective MBTs from other game nations to the game, similar to efficiency to the later versions of the Leopard 2. So put it like this, the way I see this is right now, this is an open truth about how the 2A6 has been dominating the game, and it's not a surprise. They put a vehicle in the game which has high mobility, good reload rate, best pen in the game, and it's able to go through upper glacis of the majority of vehicles it faces, especially the Soviet and the Chinese ones. So that thing has been battering the head of USSR vehicles over the last, few months, which makes sense. Anybody could have looked at it and put that. Now, the contention here is the fact that they do say, you know, they're working on introducing more effective MBTs from other game nations to the game to counter stuff like the Leopard 2A6. Now, this is good, this is positive, but at the same time, the question has to arise, why were they not all added in at the same time? Why was it the fact that when the 2A6 was added, it didn't have any legitimate competition apart from a T90A, which isn't competition to it? Anybody could have seen this. Now, this might be because of the fact that stuff wasn't ready, this might be because of the fact they wanted to release it with the new power, but obviously what has happened is it has created a bunch of issues when it comes to the game. Now, what they're doing to combat this is obviously moving down all of the Soviet BRs at top tier, the Russian Federation BRs at top tier, but they're also keeping the T80B at 10.0, so they're not moving it down to 9.7. They've removed that change, but they are making a ton of other changes to the USSR. The next point as well is very, very important when it comes to this stuff. In ground RBs, some pairs of meetings of game nations in certain BR ranges will be disabled, and new pairs of meetings can be added to simplify the work on the matchmaker. So I actually asked for clarification on this and got a very, very fast response, and basically what this is saying is before you had pairings of nations which would work together, you know, I suppose Germany and Japan, you know, America and Britain, you know, USSR and China. These pairings were they happened quite a lot when it came to the matchmaker. Now, what is happening is they're changing the pairings which are happening to try and balance the nations out between themselves. I think this is completely fine. I know there's going to be a lot of people who go, oh, my historical matchmaking. Yeah, go and play another game. Historical matchmaking will never happen in this game. It would kill the game overnight, and it's just not something that can be feasible because of many things that we've talked about in the past. So when it comes to this, I think hopefully this is a positive change. Hopefully this means it will bring a little bit more balance to the area. It will also mean that tanks which haven't fought other vehicles for a long time or haven't ever fought other vehicles will be forced to, and therefore we will be in a situation where there'll be a bunch of different changes and a bunch of different new statistics for many, many vehicles, which might get very, very confusing very, very quickly. But basically, just understand you'll get paired with different nations and you'll face different nations. That's pretty much what this is saying at certain BR brackets. The next part is currently tanks of the Leopard 2A5 and 2A6 series have a high level of efficiency, significantly exceeding top tier tanks from other nations. Therefore, in order to balance these tanks, their rate of fire will be reduced by 1 shot per minute from 10 to 9 shots. Nobody can be surprised by this. And also, it also goes to what I was saying previously, how they use reload rates as a balancing factor for high tier vehicles. I'm fine with this, you know. I don't really care. For me, when it comes to high tier, it's all classified anyway, or at least the majority of it is classified. I think trying to bug report this stuff, I put my flag down, you know, in I think it was 2017 or 2018 in an Advancing Storm when the Abrams was added, and I said that anybody who's trying to bug report this stuff will just get met with, well, we need to balance it or it's classified, so no. And that's what we're going to end up having here. The reload rates are being used to balance vehicles. I think that's completely fine if it has a positive effect, especially on the top tier meta. The units which are getting their rate of fire changed is the Leopard 2A6, the Leopard 2A5, the STRV-122B PLSS, and the STRV-122A. Not a surprise. Out of those, I've only used the STRV-122A, which I've spaded. It is a monster, and it's also seen as lesser than the 2A6, so I can't even start to understand how good that 2A6 is. I'm sure it's an absolute behemoth of the battlefield. I've played against it. I haven't played it yet, but I will be playing it soon, and my god, it really is looking like a true monster. So yeah, they're changing the reload rate of the Leopards, and they're also reducing a lot of USSR BRs. Now, some of them I agree with, some of them I disagree with. This is basically how all of these conversations go. So let's get into the BR changes themselves, let's see what's going on with them, and let's see what's happening. So the EBR 54 is going up to 5.3. You know, we talked about this before. It's a good change. It's a very powerful vehicle, but it will be joined by one of its brothers pretty soon. The ground vehicles list of changes is massive, by the way, so it's going to take a little bit to get through. The swing fire. The wonderful swing fire. By the way, these are the new changes from the vehicles. So these are the changes which weren't the same as the last time. If you want to have a look at the old changes, make sure to check out the video from a few days ago. So the swing fire, it's going down to 7.3 from 7.7. In my opinion, this is completely fine. It has a weird angle of attack. It also means that being able to hit targets with the swing fire is really annoying because you have to get the arc properly on the target. The ACGMs aren't that fast. You're always going to be outdone by a normal caliber gun. So overall, seeing it go down in BR, now it just means that you can run it with a lineup which is very, very, very good in the Carnarvon, the Cent Mark III, and everything else. So I think that's completely fine. The first disagreement I have with this list is the T80U. The T80U is going down to 10.3 from 10.7. I still think the T80U is one of the best MBTs in the game. It is very low profile. It has a very good round, which a lot of the Soviet highters have. It also has gunner thermals. It has speed. It has maneuverability. But maybe with the addition of the 2A6 and also the other new rounds which have been added, maybe its armor isn't up to snuff. But overall, my time in the Soviet MBTs has been very, very positive, and the T80U is seen as one of the better ones when it comes to the game itself. So to see it go down to 10.3, I disagree with, even if I agree with the fact that they're pushing down the T72B3 since it is weaker than the T80U in pretty much every regard, apart from side armor, which isn't a huge deal in my opinion. So the T80U going down, I disagree with. The T72B3 going down, I do agree with. Forming a good 10-3 lineup with the T90, this still means that it's going to face stuff like the 2A6, stuff like the new rounds, but it'll give it a little bit of breathing space and mean that sometimes you'll get those 10-7 to 9-7 games, so therefore you'll only have to deal with 25% of the higher echelon being 10.7, which will be nice for it. The T54-49 is also going down. This is kind of a surprise to me, not going to lie. They've also added a note. The 3BM8 shell has been removed. The tank has been replaced from the group and is displayed separately in the research tree. So if you haven't got this, if you haven't got the first T54 researched and haven't got the one after it researched, this would be the time to do it. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck with a vehicle, in front of the two which are folded, meaning that it will be increased research to get past them. So if you're in that point in the tech tree, make sure to get that 47, the T54, and the one after it, so you don't get roadblocked by the 1949, since it's going down to 7.3. The 49 does have a weaker turret compared to some of its contemporaries, but overall, I don't think it's that weak. I think it's still a very good 7.7. I'm not sure I agree with the change to 7.3, just because of the fact it still has good mobility, it still has good rounds, even with one of them removed, and the reload is a little bit long compared to other vehicles, but maybe this is in an attempt to try and balance those stabilizers which are coming in from the British and just donking everything. We'll see what happens with it, but I overall don't agree with it. The ZTZ99 going down to 10.3 though, I do agree with this. The ZTZ99 was the weakest 10.7 MBT in the game. It made no sense for it to be at 10.7. You know, it has an okay round, but still still worse than a lot of them at 10.7. It has some of the worst mobility, it can't reverse, it doesn't have the best armor. I have no idea why it was put in the game at 10.7, and right now it's at 10.3, and I even believe it may have a chance of going down to 10.0. That's how at least I see it. Maybe at some point they add in the ZTZ-99A and it has better armor, maybe that's going to be the 10.7 vehicle, but the change to the ZTZ-99 is a positive one. It's kind of as simple as that. Then we had a few other changes. The ASRAD, the R, the Swedish AA, that's going from 10.0 to 10.3. This doesn't change it that much, apart from you can't run it with the SDRV121 and also the STRF lineup, which is a bit annoying, gotta be honest with you. So now you'll have to run it with the SDRV122 and 122B, the 122A and the PLSS, and I think it will still have its same functionality. I didn't personally think it was taking over games. Maybe the effectiveness of the missile is higher than I thought, but generally this just means that Sweden loses a lineup and you're going to have to replace it with the LVKV instead, which has general issues getting outranged by a lot of helicopters and also even some AGMs if you don't effectively use the proximity shells. The Su-122 is going down in BR from 2.7 to 2.3. Not a surprise at all. The volumetric changes to shells really hurt a lot of the donk cannons, which is why over the last few months we've seen a bunch of them go down in the BR. The 122 is just an extra one which is going down as well. Maybe its armor will be effective now if you can angle it, but the shell is still going to struggle at the BR that it's at. And also long reload, no gun depression, no turret. It's just got a lot of bad factors to it, and the fact that they're moving it down again is no surprise. Then we had the Radpanzer 90, the Rad, that's going up to 9.3, and I think this is generally just because of its mobility and also the changes that were made to hull brake. Now it's quite hard to hull brake the machine, even though, to be honest, before it was quite hard to hull brake it as well, but now it has, a very good APF SDS. It is able to move around maps incredibly quickly because of its wheels and because of generally how they work. It's a very strong vehicle, and to see it go up is no surprise. The only thing that it lacks as a vehicle is the fact that it doesn't have thermals, and that with the combo of the G91R3 has been very powerful for a very long time. I don't think this will actually make the Rad suffer that much. It will just mean that the 9.0 lineup overall gets a bit weaker, but it's still very strong for Germany, so it should be completely fine. The Su-57B goes down to 2.7. I would like to remind you that this thing started off around 4.0, 4.3. Somebody had the idea that this thing was as competitive as a T-34-57. I don't know who decided that was the case, but they were obviously very wrong. The Su-57B is terrible. It has no armor, it has no engine, it is just very slow. The only thing it has is the gun, and the gun itself is very good, but if you don't have anything supporting it, then it's going to fall apart, and that's what we've seen with the Su-57B. Once again, not a surprise it goes down in BR, but I wonder how low this can go, mainly because of its terrible armor. The IKV-103 also goes down, another machine that literally gets killed by machine guns because the gunner, for some reason on this machine, is looking out of an optical hole, and you can actually just machine gun him to death. And the rounds on it are terrible. The machine itself, if it even gets sneezed on by artillery, it dies. So to see this go down, not a surprise. It's really not a good vehicle and really awful to play. And then we have another vehicle which is also going down, and that is the IS-3. Now this is more of an interesting one from general ideas. I'm guessing this, when it comes to these USSR changes, they're bringing these vehicles down in order to either have lineups against stuff like the M48 or have lineups with stuff like the M48. That's why they've moved down the T-54, that's why they're moving down the IS-3, and the IS-3, it does have its issues. You know, it doesn't have any gun depression, it has a really long reload, sometimes its shell does absolutely nothing when you try and pen something, it doesn't have a stabilizer, you know, the only thing it can rely on is its armor, and generally if you're facing stuff which is firing heat or very high penning APDS at you, you can't even rely on that. So seeing it go down, to me, is not really a surprise, but I think it's going to cause a few issues for some people, especially if it gets fully downtied into 6.0. It'll be a monster if it gets into a lot of 6.7 matchmaking, and it will be a true counter to something like a T-34, which will have to shoot that little triangle, and guess what? With volumetric shells, it ain't that easy to hit. So yeah, it should, if it becomes a meta vehicle, be incredibly fun to play. The Object 268 also moves down. This thing is awful. It's one of the worst tank destroyers in game, and it also has a terrible stock shell, which means it puts a lot of people off playing it straight away, and I'm not surprised that this thing goes down. You know, I think it should be lower than the IS-3. I would actually personally keep the IS-3 at 7.3 because I'm worried about it taking over 6.7, 6.3, and I would just move down the Object 268 personally, because these two vehicles are not comparable. You know, the 268 is not on the same level as the IS-3 because, well, it doesn't have a turret, and the donkey gun that the 268 has doesn't work very effectively. The next one is the Char 25T, and that's going up to 7.0. Once again, not a surprise, has a ridiculously high repair cost because it's very efficient. It has a really good autoloader, has a very good gun on it, and also is very fast forwards and very fast backwards. It's one of my favorite light tanks in the game. It can do whatever it wants, and at 7.0 it still will have a good French lineup around it, so it will still do very well. It has everything you'd want, you know, smoke, artillery, scouting, maneuverability, good gun. It has everything, so to me, really not a surprise it goes up. One of the things that is a surprise though is the AML-90. The AML-90, the little wheeled terror, it is small, you know, it is mobile when you get the modifications on it and when you get specific maps, but it has issues. It doesn't brake. The brakes don't really work on the vehicle, and also at the same time, the 90mm pens a lot, but it doesn't do a lot of post-pen damage. You can also get 50 cal to death in the AML-90, so I'm kind of surprised this one is going up in BR. I disagree with it going up in BR, but I think it will still be combat effective because you can run it with the Char 25T, run it with the AMX of the AMX 50, I believe it is, or the AMX M4, and just have a really good lineup around it. Then we have the Carnarvon. So once again, Britain outshines the world. The British Empire is not over, and it never will be, and it is shown in War Thunder. The Carnarvon is moving up in BR once again from 7.0 to 7.3. This is basically predicated on three things. The first one, it has a stabilizer, and the stabilizer is very effective. The second one, APDS for larger caliber guns got a massive buff last year, and this means that APDS went from sometimes penning and not doing anything to absolutely desecrating vehicles' insides. So the Carnarvon, the Centurions, all of these vehicles massively benefited from this change, and you can see the fruits of that change right now. The third thing as well is the volumetric shell change meant that all of the little weird angles that stuff like the Carnarvon has on its turret means that it's a lot more survivable than it was before, so therefore it's going to be able to take over the battlefield. So it goes up to 7.3. Hopefully this will also be followed with a repair cost reduction, because it still is incredibly high for the vehicle, and I would say too high. So hopefully that is what happens. The next change is the Leopard 1. Now this is one of those changes which I think has been made to try and strengthen the M48 and BMP lineup at 7.3. The Leopard 1 moving down to 7.3 is kind of a surprise, if I'm honest with you. Even though it doesn't have a stabilizer, it has great mobility, it has good heat, it has great optics, you know, the rangefinder does work very well as well. I've never had any issues in the Leopard 1. The only issue I had was the stock grind with its APDS back in the day, but that was years ago, so being able to recollect it ain't too easy. So yeah, the vehicle going down to 7.3, I'm kind of surprised by. It does mean that the Leopard 1 will have, much better matchmaking now, and it'll mean it'll get into 6.7s more, so it'll be able to deal with a lot of the heavy tanks that the Soviets and the Americans are going to be bringing, and even the British, so maybe this helps it out. Also, as I said, it strengthens the M48, which I think helps it quite a lot. The T-25's moving up to 6.3, where it should have been when it was released. The T-25 is a better version of the Pershing, the M26. A lot of people are going to say, how can you say that? It's slightly less mobile. It's got less armor. It's got a stabilized 90. It's got a stabilized 90 at 6.0. Come on, let's be honest. It's insane. It's an amazing vehicle. It's one of my favorite American vehicles, that exists when it comes to the game. And to see it go up to finally be the BR that it should be, which is, the BR of 6.3, so you can run it with the Super Pershing and also the Pershing, makes complete sense. It's an insanely good vehicle and has been for a crazy amount of time. I'm amazed. I'm absolutely amazed that this vehicle has not gone up in BR before this point. And to be honest, it's nice that it's being pushed up. It's nice with the fact that it's going to be at a BR where it actually makes sense now, instead of being a pub stomper that it has been for the longest time. Then also with the Carnarvon change, they're changing all of the other 7.0s to 7.3s, which are for Sweden and for Britain. So the same reasoning can be given to them as the Carnarvon. So as I said, I think it's a positive change, but they need to reduce the repair costs on them. So Cent Mark III, Centurion Action X, STRV RB52 UK, and then the Swedish version as well, and the STRV 81 all go up in BR. This makes sense, Then this means that the FV4202 is left at 7.0. It's still going to be a very good vehicle, but it does have its issues compared to the Carnarvon, mainly its mobility issues, which it struggles with the most. So this actually splits up the lineup that Britain has had for a very long time, that 3 MBT lineup, and now it's slightly changing, but it's still going to be very, very, very strong. The M4A4 SA50 also moves up in BR. This is a positive change. This should have been done a very long time ago. The SA50, the only thing it's really struggled with is, since the Jumbo got pushed up for the French, it didn't really have a lineup around it, but since the EBR got added, now with that and the AMX13 DCA, hopefully people saw how good it was, and it's been an incredibly good vehicle for a very, very long time. So the gun is very good on it. It's not that stable, but the optics make up for it, and also, once you get all the upgrades on it, it's not too unstable. The mobility is not the best, the armor is okay, but the gun is just fantastic at that BR. It's a KV killer. So the fact that it's going up in BR is a positive, and you'll still be able to run it with a cracker lineup. You can still run it at 5.3 with the Jumbo if you want to, and be very combat effective with it. The next set of vehicles which are going up are the Comets, so the Comet 1 and also the Iron Duke, which is the premium version. There is also something to mention about the Comet 1. It is getting switched in location with the Challenger in the tech tree. So this is, going to be in a slightly different place. So if you're researching it, make sure to take that into account. It's going up to 5.7. along with the Iron Duke. This is fine. You can still run it at 5.7. It's a very, very powerful vehicle. Good APDS, great muzzle velocity, very dodgy armor on the turret, so it can ricochet stuff it shouldn't, and overall just a very strong vehicle. Just hide its hull and also play it passively, so therefore you don't get into situations that you can't get out of because it doesn't have a reverse gear. So yeah, overall a very, very, very good tank, and seeing it go up in BR, not too much of a surprise. The TAM2C also goes up in BR. Now, this one has been off a lot of people's radar for a lot of the time, but it is an incredibly strong vehicle. The TAM2C is a vehicle which has Gen 2 thermals, commander and gunner. It is a scout vehicle with also access to a ridiculously good penning APF SDS round. It is one of those vehicles that for some reason nobody talks about, but is really strong at its BR. So seeing it go up to 9.7, once again, not a surprise, and now you're probably going to have to run it with the Leopard 2K, which isn't the strongest 9.7 vehicle in the world, because it only has access to DM13, but it does have that crackerjack 20mm, so you can do some work with it. So the TAM2C overall will still be good. It will still be able to be played exactly how it was played before. I would definitely put it in my lineup at 9.7, so yeah, it's still a very, very good vehicle. One of the things that is missing from all of these light vehicle changes, though, my boy, the VMF5. Where you at? You need to go down in BR, son, or you need to get reduced RP cost. Something has to happen with my VMF. Please, save my British boy. Please. And then the Marder 3. The Marder 3 is going down in BR. I don't really have too many comments on this. I'm kind of surprised that it's going down in BR. I thought the gun was very good. The overall mobility of the vehicle was okay. Didn't have a lot of armor, but not a lot of stuff at that BR has any armor. So to see it go down is kind of a surprise. Does mean you can run it with some more Panzer 3s and 4s, so maybe it gets a little bit more play, which will be nice for it. The Churchill 1 is going up to 3.3. I don't know, man, about this Churchill 1 change. That thing only has a 2-pounder as a main gun. It gets to a point where that 2-pounder really becomes very ineffective. We might have to start talking about the Little John adapter. Think about the fact that the Churchill 1 at 3.3 can now face KVs. Yeah, a bit rough. So I would disagree with this change personally. I don't think it's that combat effective. It's a very fun vehicle to use, but the issue with it is you are very limited by the firepower of the gun. And the Churchill 3 is also going up to 4.3 from 4.0. I disagree with this. I don't think its armor is good enough to be able to go up in BR, and I think this is actually going up in BR predicated on the fact that the German Churchill is doing so well and going up in BR. The reason why the German Churchill is doing so well is because it doesn't face the gun. You know how we talked about, the opposition that vehicles face? This is another example of that. So the Panzerkampfwagen Churchill doesn't face the long 75mm from the Japanese or from the Germans because it's German. So what happens is it faces stuff like the 75s from the Germans, which, if they use APCR, they can pen it with, but a lot of people don't take APCR, or, sometimes it's hard to load because, you have to fire one shot off. They face a lot of the British vehicles, but the British aren't very strong around those BRs. You're basically dealing with Cromwells and stuff like that, or maybe the odd Sherman Firefly, which you can frontally pen, and I really don't think the Churchill 3 for Britain is as strong as the German Churchill, because the German Churchill has the captured lineup. It has the T-34, it has the KV-1B, and it also has anything else that is in the tech tree of that BR. So to see the British one go up is a surprise. To see the German one go up, not a surprise. The KV-1B also should go up. Let's be honest, that is still a monster of a vehicle. It is an incredibly good one, which has very high effectiveness. The Crusader Mark III is going up from 2.7 to 3.0. I think this is fine. The Crusader Mark III has a very good gun for its BR, has good mobility, and one thing a lot of people forget about is it has scouting, and also it can, I'm not sure if it has scouting. I believe it has scouting, but I'm not entirely sure. The other thing as well is it has a ton of smoke grenades. So you can actually just go around and just drop smoke grenades everywhere and do a ton of damage with it just by smoking the enemy and then going around and being a nuisance. It's also part of a very powerful 2.7 lineup for the British, so seeing it go up is not a surprise. The Stug 3F going down to 3.3, that's fine. It struggles with armor. It's very easy to pen that thing because it has the flat part where the driver sits, so you can hit the driver gunner in one shot and then you just keep shooting there and it will eventually die. So seeing that go down, once again, not a surprise. So overall, there is stuff here I agree with, there is stuff here I disagree with. There's a lot of BR changes, a lot of stuff to take in, a lot of things to talk about, a lot of things to discuss, and because of that, make sure you go onto the forums and make your voice heard about what you believe is correct when it comes to the game. Also, chuck some comments into this comment section. I am actually very interested to see what you guys think of these changes, just to get a general idea of where your heads are at. Anyway, I hope you all have a great day, have a wonderful time, see you later. I'd just like to thank Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Hosest Kishore, Hans, Bareen, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.